Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining in. I'm Shagun. I will be your moderator today. Today, we are joined by lawyers, students, and professionals working on online safety for a webinar on digital safety and young women in India. To start the webinar, I would like to invite Ms. Gayatri Sharma, the Program Director of Women Power Connect, to deliver the welcome address. Ms. Gayatri, please.
Hello everyone, I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for coming today and a warm welcome on behalf of Women Power Connect. So to begin with, when, at the beginning of the year in January, when FES and WPC, when we were doing our work plan for the year, we had no idea that we would be spending all of 2020 behind a screen and sitting in our homes all cooped up. So while the issue of online safety and digital safety was always important, it has become increasingly important as internet use has gone up. And as per the Ministry of Telecom, internet use has gone up by 13%. It's a great thing on one hand, of course, the fact that we are able to use technology such as Facebook, WhatsApp, Twitter, Instagram. It allows us to keep in touch with everyone personally and professionally as well. At the same time, it comes with a lot of abuse. And online abuse. Just to share a statistic, our consumption of child pornography has gone up by 95% according to an NGO, the Child Protection Fund. So that is nothing to be very proud of. The boys' locker room case, I think that was the most recent incident that I can think of where abuse on online platforms was noticed at a national level. And I think the victims were not just the girls in the boys' locker room case, but also the young man who committed suicide in Gurgaon. He's also a victim of growing, I would say, mob justice, where Facebook, Twitter, and all these online platforms actually help in pushing a form of mob justice where people seem to have lost faith in the criminal justice system. So they prefer to use these platforms to name and shame. So with these few words, thank you again for coming. I'm really grateful to panelists, Advocate Sumita Hazarika, Advocate Tara Narula, and Ms. Jyoti Vadhera, who will be speaking about the law and their experience on dealing with cases of online abuse. But this is a student-led webinar, so we do want the youth to share their experience. After all, you are the ones who are living with technology much more than we have. I got my first smartphone only well after graduation, so for most of my life, I was not addicted to technology like the way you are. We will hear the students first as panelists, and you have presentations, I know. And so we look forward to hearing to you. And now I think over to Jyoti and maybe Damayanti also, if you'd like to say a few words.
Thank you, Ms. Gayatri. I would like to invite Ms. Jyoti, the Program Manager of FES, to say a few words. Ma'am, please.
Jyoti, you have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi. Hi, good evening, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you, especially to our panelists, to Ms. Hazarika, Ms. Vadhera, Ms. Narula, and to all the students. It gives me immense pleasure to be here now on behalf of the German Foundation Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and to welcome you to today's Gender Log which is titled Digital Safety and Young Women in India During the COVID-19 Pandemic. I would just say a few words about this German foundation that I represent. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung is dedicated to the principles of peace, solidarity, and social justice. From our core mission of promoting social justice, we derive the leitmotif of promoting gender justice. Friedrich Ebert Stiftung has offices in about 100 countries worldwide, with head office in Berlin and in Bonn. In India, we've been active since 1983. In the gender unit, we've been working on women in work, women in politics, and on the issues of gender sensitization. With these series of gender logs, we want to have a larger outreach to young people of all genders, and we want to talk about the current issues that concern them. We want to be able to build platforms for open discussions and for new ideas to take these issues forward. As Gayatri has already mentioned, it's been a crazy, confusing, chaotic, challenging year, and we all are dealing with it collectively. We've also seen some good examples, a lot of work being moving on to the online platform, which comes with a cost, as Gayatri has already mentioned. And we want to take stock of the issues that we are faced with, the new issues that we are faced with in these digital spaces. And at this point of time, these online connections are the norm. And it's only pertinent to give the floor to the youth and to understand the myriad challenges that the situation poses. So here we are today. Let me express my sincere gratitude to Gayatri, to the WPC team, and take these discussions forward. I really look forward to an enriching discussion, maybe move towards solutions, and also see the examples that come from the youth. Thank you very much. And with these words, I pass the floor back to Shagun.
Thank you, Ms. Raval. Thank you, Ms. Raval, for your address. The webinar, as we know, the webinar is divided into two sections. First, we will have the student presentation from the students of Janki Devi Memorial College, Lady Irwin College, and Jamia Millia Islamia. In the second session, we will have the panelists to talk on digital safety. As a panelist, we have Ms. Jyoti Vadera, Advocate Sumita Hazarika, and Advocate Tara Narula. So let's begin with the presentation. I would like to invite Ms. Shreya Singh from Janki Devi Memorial College. Shreya.
Thank you. Actually, the host has disabled participants to share their screens. So I would request the host to kindly allow me to share my screen.
Ms. Gayatri, I think you are the host.
Shreya, can you check now?
Yeah, just a minute. Yes.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. My name is Shreya Singh, and I am a third-year student of Sociology Honours at Janki Devi Memorial College. I would like to present the topic, is victim blaming and shaming appropriate on the issue of image sharing? Is it only a woman's responsibility to stay safe? In order to understand others' views and opinions, I have conducted a survey of 50 people, including both men and women, who are between the age 18 and 28. Most of the data in my presentation is based on this first-hand research that I conducted. Let's get started with the topic. I shall begin by defining the term image sharing. In simple words, image sharing means uploading, hosting, managing, and sharing of photos, which can be done either publicly or privately. Some of the most used applications for image sharing include WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, Tinder, Bumble, Snapchat, etc. In this context, I had a question in my questionnaire which read, is there a particular way in which women should present themselves? Majority chose no as their answer and are of the opinion that an individual should wear whatever he or she wants and upload whichever picture they like. It is all about an individual's choice. Now let us understand what happens when we share any picture publicly. Firstly, it is available to everyone and everybody has access to it. This automatically makes it clear that any picture can be morphed or deep faked. The picture that you see on your screens, the left one is the real picture and the right one is the deep faked picture, which means that even if someone has uploaded a fully clad picture, even that is subject to vulnerability. In such cases, the individual uploading the picture is absolutely not at fault. On the other hand, there are semi-nude or nude pictures that are sometimes sent by an individual to another. In most cases, the two could be in a romantic relationship or could just be casually sexting. There are two situations which might lead to an individual sharing their private pictures with the other person. One situation could be of pure love, which happens mostly in long-distance relationships. The other situation could be of the individual being compelled to do so in some way or the other. Given the patriarchal setup and stereotyping, both the sexes play the game, but only women are blamed and shamed. So this image sharing in private has its own repercussions if forwarded by the receiver to others. Some of the reasons behind men forwarding these pictures would be their sick mentality, ego, to degrade the woman's image, to look cool, or just for fun. Coming to the repercussions, when a nude photo is sent to another person, there are no guarantees that the picture will remain private. And in many cases, the pictures rarely do. The receiver may keep blackmailing the sender of making the pictures public in return for favors. Alternatively, once a relationship ends or a partner becomes angry, the pictures can be mass distributed as an act of revenge, as a result of which the person in the photo is often embarrassed and humiliated. This can cause immense guilt and shame and impacts self-esteem, leaving them feeling vulnerable and exposed. Many times, friendships dissolve. This experience can leave the victim feeling betrayed and alone. Because peer pressure is a powerful force. Friends often distance themselves from the person being targeted because they fear being bullied and their reputations being harmed by the friendship, especially if slut shaming is involved. All these earlier mentioned situations might lead to the victim feeling hopeless and depressed, and they may also contemplate suicide. In my survey, I had asked if the victim should be blamed in such situations. As can be seen in the pie chart, the majority of my respondents denied because these cases are more about the betrayal of someone's trust that one might have bestowed on the partner or on the individual with whom the pictures were shared. However, it is always better to be safe and avoid even clicking such pictures on the phone because these pictures get saved in the phone's cloud and a hacker can have access to it. Similarly, there are times when the person to whom the picture was shared might not be the person to have leaked the pictures, but someone else who might have had access to the receiver's electronic devices. As of now, I have put across the ways in which an individual might get into problems and what happens thereafter. However, I would also like to throw light upon some of the solutions to these problems, as in the probable steps that an individual can take in case he or she is blamed with the private pictures. Neutralizing the threat means, for example, if a girl is blackmailed by saying that if a person blackmails a girl by saying that he would go and show the pictures to someone, for example, her parents, the best way out would be if the girl herself goes and tells the facts to her parents. Yes, doing this would be difficult, but would be of great help. Similarly, the girl can turn to her support system or talk to a counselor who could be of help and lessen her burden in some way or the other. The victim can just file a complaint by telling the police the whole story without revealing her name or address, as it is not mandatory, or simply get a lawyer. Further, I would also like to point out that there are some legal provisions available. I'm sure our speakers, Ms. Hazarika and Ms. Narula, are in a better position to throw light on this aspect. Lastly, I'm sorry.
Right. I think, Shreya, you have 1 more minute, and then if you could wind up.
Okay,
And if all other participants could please mute themselves.
Lastly, I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that it is definitely the girl's responsibility to stay safe, but it is not just her responsibility, because her partner has to be loyal and not betray her trust. However, in case the pictures are leaked, it is then the family and friends' responsibility to be understanding and support her in coming out of the situation. The NGOs, the government, and the cybercrime cells of the police department also have to do their responsibility by making the internet a safer place. Therefore, it is the society at large which has to be understanding and responsible instead of blaming and shaming the victim. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shreya. Now we have Ms. Kohima from Janki Devi Memorial College. Kohima.
Yes, can you make me the host so that I can start my screen sharing? Is it visible?
Yes, please start. Please start. And you have 5 to 7 minutes. Kohima, you have to unmute yourself.
First of all, a very warm good evening to one and all present here. I, Kohima, currently pursuing BA Sociology Honours from Janki Devi Memorial College, Delhi University. Today, I would like to present my views over the statement that has it been easier for men to approach women online rather offline, and my views over the fact that do men face more rejections over the social networking sites. My views are based on the survey conducted by me, in which I had interviewed 35 people of different age groups, including men and women. In the digital era, we all know that over the social networking sites, our approach to one another has increased many folds. Interactions nowadays has become granular and dynamic, making the connections and the reach much more possible. Nowadays, social media has become an inevitable part of our life. Where everyone seems to be connected. According to the data gathered by International Journal of Communication in the year 2019, more than half of the Indian population has an access to social media apps, and 96% of youth had a daily average of 3-4 hours spent on the social media. Coming over to the fact that has it been easier for men to approach women online rather offline, I found it through my survey that 82% of people agreed that men can easily approach women online. This can be due to several reasons. that our online platforms had become much more flexible, where one can easily hide one's real identity. If we compare this while talking in the offline platforms or while interacting with the offline platforms, we found that in offline platforms, the people are extra conscious with each other, and thus this psychological element get reduced over online platforms. Over these platforms, one can easily make oneself more desirable through highly edited photographs, through moderating their personalities and boosting their characters. 82% of them believe that men can easily
I'm
online.
sorry, I'm going to say something here, Kohima. I think no one can see your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Ma'am, I will.
Actually, there's a window opened, like the Google window is open. So if you can remove that and then share a PowerPoint.
I think you need to share your entire screen for showing your PPT.
Yes, ma'am. I don't know. On my screen, it is opening, and I am not able to.
Is there another page open, like a Google page open? Can you close everything else and just have your PowerPoint on your screen?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to.
You can stop sharing and then share again.
Okay, ma'am.
Maybe what we can do is then we go on to the next presenter and we'll come back to Kohima when you figure
Yes,
out.
ma'am.
We'll
Yes,
come back to
ma'am. Yes,
Kohima,
ma'am.
you
Yes.
can take on. So Shagun, move on to the next presenter.
So next we have Ms. Rishika Jain from Janki Devi Memorial College.
Thank you. Could you please make me the host?
Try to share your screen. Enable.
Is it visible?
Yes, Dee.
Okay. So good evening, everyone. Today I, Rishika Jain, a third-year student of Sociology Honours at Janki Devi Memorial College, will be throwing some light on the topic whether the usage of dating sites such as Tinder or Bumble should be strictly restricted to those who are below 18 years of age, and what are the measures that can be taken to monitor how old these students are for using such sites. So, we all know that online dating is a way for people to find and contact each other through the internet to arrange date, usually with the goal of developing a personal and romantic relationship. Online dating has been more prevalent since the launch of Tinder in 2012. Nearly a quarter of people have used or are currently using online dating services. For young and middle-aged adults between 18 to 44 years, the number has increased to a third. Different people have reflected different perspectives while using these sites. 75% of young adults, that is between 18 to 24 years of age, use Tinder, an app known for hookups. Bumble, a dating app that gives women the sole power of initiating a conversation, is at a distant 31%. Adults between 25 to 35 years of age begin to transit to Match.com for the top dating sites for creating serious and long-term relationships. According to a survey conducted in India, 74% of men use online dating apps, while only 26% of women use these apps, which clearly shows the gender gap. While online dating and finding partners through these platforms are more common among adults who are younger or lesbian, gay, or bisexual in the United States. Now, I would briefly like to notify the pros and cons of online dating applications, which has been stated by eharmony.com. The pros are, we meet like-minded people through these sites. Secondly, dating sites match based on compatibility and personality. Again, meeting people you might not have ever crossed paths with is allowed by these sites. 1 of every 5 relationships start through these sites. Again, it is a good tool for shy people. As someone who is more reserved, a dating app is like a beacon of hope. Gone are those moments when you can't decide if you want to make the first move, when you see someone you think is cute from across the street. Coming to the cons of dating sites, it is a very crowded digital space. Secondly, people lie on their profiles. While this isn't much of a surprise, unfortunately, many users, mostly men, lie about their age, height, and weight, while female users lie about their weight, physical build, and age. Next, it's hard to evaluate a match without any physical interaction. Online dating can be a con when the relationship only exists online and does not include any physical or face-to-face interaction. Most sites put a lot of pressure on physical attractiveness, which lend people to fake themselves in order to look good, and hence can generate dislike for people when met in person. Dating apps put a lot of romantic pressures as well. According to a survey conducted by PEW Research Center, the major reasons for online dating were found to be following. People date online for having fun, to find friends. Also, people use it to have a good time with an interesting person. Others use it for having a partner or for having sexual relationships. A very less number of people use these sites for having a partner for marriage. Let's now talk about why the legal age of being on online dating sites is said to be 18 years. Firstly, the minimum age is put 18 to protect the dating site from legal ramifications. With dating sites, it's assumed that many users not looking for love, dating and sex. In today's society, when dating is mentioned, sex is typically right behind. There is a popular understanding that 18 years and below is way too small. Thus, they can make a lot of mistakes from being immature. Their inexperience in life can harm them and make wrong decisions. But because in many places, people under 18 are considered minors, it is illegal for someone over 18 to fool around with someone above 18. In Tinder's revised terms of usage on 18 January, under the accounts section, it is clearly stated that in order to use Tinder, we can sign in through our Facebook login. And you may see on the PPT on your screens that it can show Facebook login as well. The same goes for Bumble as well. According to PEW Research Center, among those who have used dating site or app in the past years, 45% of people felt frustrated and others even felt pessimist and insecure. There were certainly other people who felt optimistic and confident. The reasons for people feeling all negative than positive is due to the various types of crime related to these online dating sites. In the research, these crimes...
Sorry, Rishika, but one more minute. And
Yeah, I'll just wind it up. It's like there are crimes related like rape, sexual assault, blackmailing, sharing indecent pictures. And to protect ourselves from these crimes is by using strong passwords, sharing limited information, security solution and antivirus, by reporting the users, by not allowing access to contacts for the dating sites. But as we know, there are some legal as well as social measures which can be used as well for these sites. So the legal measures which we can use is by linking our Aadhaar card for making identity authentication more strong, and stricter actions to be taken for the users who commit crime, and punishments for these criminals should be more strong. Then the social measures which we can take is having talk with the parents. Children below 18 can surely have talk with their parents in order to discuss issues which they are going through so that they're not curious enough. Also, providing sex education at the school level is another good solution for children to know about their sexuality and not get all curious and be on such sites. At last, I would conclude my presentation by saying that the legal age for anyone using such sites should be above 18 years of age, and there should be stricter actions and monitoring to prevent children below 18 years to be on such sites. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishika. Now we'll go back to Ms. Kohima.
Thank you. Can I start my screen sharing? Now is it visible?
Yeah, we can.
Yes, Kohima, it's visible now.
So first of all, a very warm good evening to everyone present here. I, Kohima from Janki Devi Memorial College. Today, I would like to present my views over the statement that has it been easier for men to approach women online rather offline, and the views over the bias that men face more rejection over social networking sites. For this, I had concluded a survey of 35 people where I had interviewed them I had interviewed men and women of different age groups regarding this context. In the digital era, social networking site interactions has increased manifolds, where our reach to one another has increased to a greater extent. Interactions nowadays has become much more dynamic and granular. People over these sites interact with one another to engage in relationships, to make friends, for entertainment, etc. And social networking sites provide an exact platform to do this. Based on my survey, I had found that 82% of them believe that it is easier for men to approach women online, while 12% believe that it is difficult to approach women online. This may be due to several reasons. One, online platforms had become much more flexible, so that it provides an opportunity to hide one identity from both the sites, so that the extra conscious factor can easily get erased over these sites. While talking of offline platforms, this psychological element is present. On these platforms, one can easily present themselves more desirable through highly edited photographs, through moderating their personalities and boosting their characteristics. Online platforms provides computer-mediated communications, which are different from face-to-face interactions, therefore making it more easy for them to open up with each other, while this is absent in offline platforms. The level of confidence over online platforms is much more higher than offline platforms. Many boys approach girls only for fun. They can easily do it through social networking sites, through making fake IDs, making multiple accounts, etc. On the basis of data gathered, I found that 52.4% of men start the conversation by messaging first, by involved in mass messaging techniques. And over these social networking sites, these multiple factors had led to exponential increase in the online interactions, where these interactions are surrounded by both pros and cons. The chances of rejections over these online platforms are much more higher. If I conclude my survey, 82% of them were of view that men can easily approach women online, and they also viewed that men face rejections much more easily over these sites. There are multiple factors supporting these arguments. Many a times their requests are rejected before the start of a conversation. The IDs, either fake, either real ones, the accounts can easily be blocked or reported in the case the environment become uncomfortable. So the rejection becomes much more easy. There can be very easy breakdown of communication over these environment, over the online platforms, making the environment totally uncomfortable. There is stark difference of perceptions between different people, and one would note over these sites can perceive that what one is thinking and can act accordingly, making the chances of rejection much more easy. Difference in behavior, attitude, creation of environment while communicating online without face-to-face interactions can highly affect the chances of rejections over these sites. Those social networking sites and digital platform had provided us with multiple opportunities, multiple possibilities, accessibility, flexibility, greater reach. There is other darker side to it as well, which can't be ignored. Though one can maintain anonymity over these sites, but in the name of anonymity, one can do anything. One can stoop to any limit. There are very high cases of stalking, harassment, hacking, mental torture, and even in the recent survey by International Journal of Communication during this pandemic had found that 85% of increase in these type of negative impacts of social media, and this can have a very severe impact on the other person's life. Our rationality over using these sites and getting involved over these sites is on a sharper decrease, because we are not conscious that how we are behaving on these sites, how we are arguing, how we are commenting, or how we are engaged in a conversation while interacting on social networking apps. Looking at the genderized nature of online interactions and approach, we had by now found it that it is easier for men to approach women online due to greater accessibility. And though the rejections are very easy over these sites, they don't take these rejections very easily, very seriously. Why? Because they have a greater approach. They can approach anyone, anytime over these sites through fake IDs, through their multiple accounts, through hacking, and they can stalk anyone, anytime. So one research, again pointing out to the research by International Journal of Communication in the year 2019, they had found it that women are more intricately involved in the process of deciding whether they should interact over these sites or not. Why? Because they are governed by social rules or behaviors. There are certain gender stereotypes that prevailing over their mind, that they should not be more open, they should not operate social sites as much. But on the other side, if we talk of men's view, then they use these network sites as a places for an entertainment, and they are less conscious about themselves over these sites in maintaining the big networks. At the last, I would like to say that one's behavior, one's attitude, one's rationality plays a very important role while interacting online, while interacting over these social networking sites. And this will decide that you are lying to the positive side of social media and you are lying to the negative side of the social media. Thank you so much, everyone, for your kind attention, and very sorry for the inconvenience caused before. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kohima. Now we'll go to Ms. Shruti Vinod from Lady Irwin College. Shruti, you there?
Thank you, Shagun. I shall start presenting my screen. I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Right. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me today. And so I'm a student of doing MSc at Development Communication and Extension Department at Lady Irwin College. This evening, I will be speaking to you on victim blaming and image sharing. So the first speaker for the day today has already spoken very beautifully on the issue. And I hope that the discussions today by my presentation would set in that proper background. Let me also mention before I proceed that the views I share today are largely personal and would not be based on any scientific findings. Before I dig deeper into my topic, let's take a look at an example. So imagine this is a door in your house that is locked. A robber manages to get in and robs you of some of your valuables. Whose fault would you say this is? Yours or the robbers? I'm guessing the majority of you would blame it on the robbers. Now let's say that the door was open, accidentally or intentionally. It surely was even easier for the robber to get in now and steal from your house. But who's to blame? I'm again guessing that it has to be the robber. While we might say a lot of these things, मुझे याद नहीं था, कभी तो ध्यान दिया करो, our parents would be at us, our friends, our siblings, but you'll eventually get the incident reported. Why is that? Because one, you did not invite the robber to walk into your home. Secondly, you did not tell them of all the valuable possessions you had. They are responsible for taking any of the valuables without your permission, and it's not on you. The robbers are responsible for entering your home without consent. Similarly, when we talk about sharing images digitally, today's technology allows us to share photos and memories across miles with the click of a mouse or a tap on a screen. Unfortunately, this technology can make those photos and data very vulnerable. As digital technology becomes more pervasive and interconnected, cybercrime expands as a criminal activity, creating both new offenses and victims. Whether you share an image within a private discussion, just like the closed door we saw, or in a public forum, like the open door, it is important to realize that just like the robber, using your photo without consent is a violation of your privacy. You cannot be blamed for a photo you shared. Your images are your own intellectual property. So, the individual or the individuals using our photo outside your knowledge can and should be held accountable of violating your rights. But why does a response change when the theft becomes digital? Why do we not measure it with the same degree of seriousness? Why do we end up blaming the victim and not take the necessary actions required to deal with the online breach of trust and privacy? That's when victim blaming comes into place. Victim blaming is defined as when the blame of a crime is partially or entirely shifted onto the survivor. In this context, the conduct of the girl is questioned and blamed on. It could be if the photograph is used without consent, social media account being hacked, someone rightly pointed out the cloud storage being hacked, a photograph shared in an intimate relationship being used out of context, or relating to stealing the information from your phone. So, we have to understand that we are responsible for the images we post. That includes us not using someone else's photo without their consent. You can also not be blamed for how someone else uses the image you have posted. That's completely out of your responsibility. You have a right to seek support and take the necessary actions to address the breach of privacy and trust. As recipients, viewers of the images, we all should be held accountable for how we decide to use the image or misuse it. Now, we have to understand that not all images have to be misused. It could be someone sharing our image without our consent, not necessarily misusing it. We must have all, I am guessing that more girls than boys would have heard this once, at least once, while posting images. Be careful posting images online, not to share intimate or private images. And I came across this beautiful quote by Anastasia Powell in one of her articles. She says the line between providing advice and placing responsibility back onto victims is very easy to cross. So if you're advising the victim, that usually happens before the incident has taken place. But if you're repeating your advice after the incident has taken place, then you're certainly blaming the victim and not taking into cognizance the deep pressure and stress that they are undergoing. To get the right answers, we need to ask the right questions. In this case, as Anastasia says in her article, why are we questioning girls and women when what we should be asking is how much of the media coverage comprises stern warnings to potential victims as compared to potential perpetrators? How often are there calls for witnesses or bystanders to report their peers' concerning behavior? I'd like to conclude my presentation with this question. Is it only a woman's responsibility to stay safe? No. I believe that it is everyone's right to stay safe, and thus it is our collective responsibility to protect the right for all. The right to security is an integral part of the right to life and personal liberty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shruti. Now we will go to Riddhi Tandon, Lady Irwin College.
So, hello everyone, am I audible?
Yes, Riddhi, you're audible.
Yes. So I have two devices, so if you can just make the other Riddhi the host, so I'll be able to share.
Can you check right now because you've enabled sharing for everyone?
I'm sorry?
Check now. You've enabled sharing.
1 second. Yes, I'm able to share. Just a second.
Okay.
Is it visible?
Yes, we can see. Can you maximize it?
So, yes. So good evening, everyone. I'm Riddhi from Lady Irwin College, and I'm doing my master's in development communication and extension from Lady Irwin College. So the topic I chose was that in this digital era where some boys are involved in derogatory behavior, for example, boys' locker room case, we all know, how do you recommend to create a safe, positive space for women in the online world? So I would just like to throw light on some of the data that Amnesty International polled 4,000 women, and out of which 76% said that they had experienced online abuse. And around 2/3 of women said that they felt a lot of powerlessness after having such an experience. 41% of them said that on at least one incident, they felt that their physical presence was threatened. So what was exactly the boys' locker room case? Boys' locker room case was an Instagram scandal allegedly involving a chat room of teenage boys from Delhi. And these all were underage boys and from 16 years old and older than that and everything like that. It was started on 3rd May 2020 when a member leaked chats from the group including obscene images of around 15 girls. So we all know that the online world is an exact image of offline world. The online world mimics the inequality, scenarios, situations of the offline world. So to explain my point, I would like to iterate a story of a shy, introverted, and not so masculine boy, Ashish. Ashish didn't have any friends. In 3rd standard, he is given the good touch and the bad touch workshop. And all the boys and the girls are seated separately, and it all imbibes that sex is actually like a sexual touch, which is reiterated as the bad touch is actually something which must not be done. Ashish grows up. In 6th standard, a mysterious menstruation workshop takes place and the boys are asked to enjoy separately and girls are having their workshop. Ashish still feels secluded in his class and he doesn't have any friends. In 8th standard, Ashish realizes that to talk about sex and all things sexual makes him macho enough. Ashish makes friends with boys of the class and gets popular. He talks about all things, like he had videos of pornography and videos of so many girls and doing this and that, and he got immediately popular in the class. Ashish grows up. In 9th standard, while the teacher hushes all topics of sexual intercourse, Ashish knows it all. Ashish becomes the star of the class, knows everything. In 10th standard, being the popular teenager, Ashish tries to make an online group titled Boys Locker Room, and then we all know the consequences. This is just a hypothetical story that I have made from my own experiences in school. So, even though Ashish had his share of cybersecurity workshops, he decided to use the knowledge to safeguard his own boys' locker room. So, these are some statements that show that what is actually happening in our society. When my mother read about the issue of boys locker room, she said कि आजकल के ज़माने के बच्चे का तो दिमाग ही खराब है. This tells that there is lack of ownership among the elders, that they are not owning up to the fact that they are not talking about sexuality and sex education with their children. Patriarchy makes the whole world a boys' locker room. There is prevalence of gender binary in schools and colleges. There are separate lines of girls and boys, and the girls and boys are not asked, like they are not allowed to intermingle with themselves. And how would they know of concepts like consent and permissions and so many things without intermingling? So I would just like to make a point that Mark Zuckerberg founded Facebook in 2004 for rating girls in his college on the basis of their appearances. Much of what is similar to the boys' locker room incident. But we all should allow one to improve themselves. So yes, we are all seeing Mark Zuckerberg is increasing the cybersecurity we have. So I would like to take an example of another comedian in 1960s in the US, that he said that Lenny Bruce, is one of his stand-ups, talks beautifully about sexual pleasure and how it was all left unexplored in the era which promoted violence to be as pleasurable. Sex is not a bad thing. Sexual pleasure is not a bad thing. Even sexting is not a bad thing. But having it all without consent is what makes it bad. So then what can we do? Let's rewind. Ashish didn't have any friends. In third standard, he is given the safe touch and unsafe touch workshop, and children would know that the future holds more information. Unsafe touch and this nomenclature actually helps children to understand that it is not bad to be touched sexually. Ashish grows up. In sixth standard, a mysterious menstruation workshop takes place, but boys and girls sit together in groups, talk to each other about menstruation and nightfalls. Ashish finally makes friends. He is able to come out to all his friends. Ashish grows up. In 8th standard, Ashish realizes that to talk about sex and all things sexual makes him aware of himself and the societal issues of gender discrimination, and so on. Ashish makes friends with everyone and gets popular. Ashish grows up. In 9th standard, while the teacher hushes all topics about sexual intercourse, Ashish knows it all. Ashish, in 10th standard, being the popular teenager, Ashish tries to make an online group titled Let's Discuss Our Sexual Rights. And then we all know what the bright future awaits. So conclusion to my whole presentation is that it is environment around the child which needs to improve. It is our patriarchal society which victimizes children, be it in any gender, as we know that one of the persecutors in its practice. Its perpetrators being school, family, home, peers, media, and whatnot. Boys and girls, even if seen together, are blamed to be. Girls aren't allowed to have friends who are boys, and a boy with too many friends who are girls is considered effeminate. The solution is right in front of our eyes as a society, and yet we are paying not enough attention to it. So that is where I end my presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Riddhi. Now we have Jahara from Jamia Millia Islamia.
Hello. Thank you so much. Is I audible?
Yes, Jahara,
okay.
you're audible.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jahara and I'm studying in Jamia Millia Islamia. So I'm going to present on the statement, like in this digital era, where some boys are involved in derogatory behavior, that is boys locker room case, how do you recommend to create a safe, positive space for women in the online world? So recently, an Instagram group, Boys Locker Room, has come to light, where male students from different schools discuss their female classmates in very disturbing ways, included posting schoolwear photos without consent and conversation about committing sexual assault, rape, gang rape, and so on. This is only one example of cybercrime. There is lots of cybercrime happening against women every day almost. And also, COVID-19 increased these challenges for women. Because the COVID-induced lockdown means children are spending more time than ever online. Schooling, entertainment, socializing, sports, it's all taking place on the internet. And unfortunately, all these also mean that the usual danger of cyberspace are multiplied. Even National Commission for Women has reported a surge in domestic violence and cybercrime, which has made girls and women more vulnerable as they struggle to fight another pandemic of violence and abuse inside their homes and now online. So now the Instagram group has now been deactivated and Delhi Police is investigating the case. So deactivating social media handles or deleting so-called provocative photos is often the most common response to such situations. But this does not address the real problem. Because the real problem is somewhere else. Bullying, stalking, defamation of women online, and this boys' locker room case showed that the patriarchal mindset has pervaded the internet space as well. So the patriarchal mindset, deeper inequalities around gender and sexuality in India, as well as a form of masculine privilege that dominate our society and now cyberspace as well, which are the heart, what we are witnessing right now. So the idea that in detention center will change attitude among teenagers. It does not work and has not worked in the past. Across the country, there are schoolboys or simply any boy or man who thinks women bodies are for sports, that sexual aggression is a sign of masculinity, and uh, uh, and that need to be changed. The existing mindset need to be changed. And to ensure safe and positive place in cyberspace to women, it's become important to change such mindsets. Because if the net users use cyberspace with such mindset, it is going to be more dangerous not only for women but also for boys. In India, the problem is like topics such as sexuality, gender, consent, mutual respect are a subject that are neglected at school in India, even at home. So our first step is we should start socializing our children about these issues in school at home. Like school can adopt school related gender based violence program so that conversation can move out of the locker room and emerge as a healthy discussion in the classroom. And also, removing the sense of taboo is equally important. We as a society must be comfortable to sit down and talk about the sexual act. We give the impression that is a big secret and something bad. Even today, the minute intimate scene in a movie, parents tell their children to get up and leave. We have to get out of this sort of mindset. We should be able to have a healthy and open conversation. Because cybercrime is not only a technological issue, cybercrime is a mindset issue as well. So, and it can also be prevented through education on technology. There is a need for social media education because you cannot stop anyone from using internet. It is a part of new way of living, and there is a need to develop some rules around it. Because restricting the use of internet or social media is not a solution. Because as individuals grow older, the focus has to be on creating a sense of responsibility when using social media. And the boys' locker room incident should act as a tale of caution. And it is also important we educate everyone about net etiquette because prevention is better than cure. So all the net users, especially women, who are more prone to be the victim of cybercrime should not share their personal information to public, securely use the digital media by creating a strong password and spreading awareness on phishing email, fake videos, and securely sharing content on the internet can help a lot in safeguarding women. So I end up here by saying if cybercrime continue to happen, then it affects girls or women's life in every sphere. Because 21st century is known as the era of internet. Everything from ordering food to business, everything is happening on internet. And if our cyberspace not safe for women, then how can we imagine women's development, women's empowerment? So to ensure safe and positive space for women, there is an urgent need to change people's mindset, as I mentioned, and cybersecurity so that everyone gets equally benefited. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jahara. Now I would like to call Mr. M.D. Buran from Jamia Millia Islamia. M.D. Buran, you there?
Yes.
You can start with your presentation now.
Yeah, yours is the last presentation, and then we'll move on to the panelists.
Thank you. Can I start now?
Yes, you can.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for giving this opportunity.
I'm afraid you're not audible.
Hi, my name is Mohammad Burhanuddin, currently pursuing graduation in sociology in Jamia Millia Islamia. Today, I would like to present is victim blaming and shaming appropriate on the issue of image sharing. It is only a woman's responsibility to stay safe. My views are, first of all, victim blaming. Be careful what you share. There are several problems with this kind of response. Perhaps most importantly, such advice contribute to the shaming and humiliation of victims by placing the responsibility back onto them for their humiliation. Feelings of shame and humiliations are common reasons many victims give for not making reports to police about sexual forms of harassment and abuse. Victims should come forward with information to assist in further investigation. So, avoiding sentiments that may further marginalize victims is particularly important. Advice to victims that is not to share intimate or private images is also problematic. It obscures the variety of methods that harass use to obtain images. While little information is publicly available in these cases about the range of images and how they were all obtained, research suggests privacy of images is not always in the victim's control. In a recent study about this, it is found that while many images of women and girls are obtained from public or semi-social media accounts, many others are obtained illegally through hacking accounts and internet-enabled devices, through obscuring and encrypted sources, as well as through images originally shared privately with an intimate partner. Now, a broader trend. It is important to provide everyone with advice on how to protect their information online and to be aware of the potential for exploitation and abuse of their material. So, take away the images, regardless of how they were originally obtained, and we still have a social problem that no amount of advice to victim is going to solve. Now I'd like to move on to the next question. It is only a woman's responsibility to stay safe. Now, society blames the victim with full force. Sometimes in a black-handed way, it's still man's world. And this distorted world somehow forgives a man for committing unimaginable things like rape, abuse, sexual assault. It is enough to look at the Me Too movement. It is a movement against sexual abuse, sexual harassment, where people publicize allegations of sex crimes committed by powerful or prominent men. And it's vague. Those who were pardoned despite the publicly known crimes they have committed. The legal system, the police, the institution blame the victim, not the overtly, but allowing specific measures and still having procedures that make victims prove their innocence when it's not even them being on trial. Now, people blame the victim. Abusers do. She dressed up that way. She went there. She provoked me. And strangers are still trolling, talking, commenting, and verbally abusing victims. Too bad that even friends and family do it too. Why did you go there? Why did you stay? Why did you allow it? Why didn't you ask for help? Why didn't you call the police? Hearing these questions from a friend or family member is painful. Those questions strip the perpetrator from all agency and responsibility. Nothing that happened was provoked by the victim or was a result of the victim's bad decision. Now, victims blame themselves. Yes, that's the saddest part for victims.
I'm
As if
sorry to
hearing it
interrupt you,
from
but if you could wind up in 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Victim blame themselves. Yes, that's the saddest part for victim. As if hearing it from society and the people around me wouldn't be enough. Have a look around. Have a look at the thoughts they were fighting back daily. Could they stop it? When was the exact point where victims made the wrong decision? What could they have done differently? Why did they allow it? Do they not have self-respect? It takes months or even years of therapy and or self-help to move on from the destructive belief where something said something that they shouldn't have. Now, can we name the real cause? Can we put the blame and the responsibility where they belong? We need to start to think about this topic differently. When there is a terrorist attack, government, police, and public say, we will not change our life. We will not change our behaviors. We will carry on as normal because we deserve a safe society. But when women are being raped and assaulted, government, police, and public figures say, women, change your behaviors. Do something different. Why are women supposed to change their lives and their behaviors for sex offenders? Now, lastly, my conclusion is that can we please stop it once and for all? Abuse, rape, sexual assault don't happen by chance. It is a choice made by the perpetrator. It is never right. It is never justified. So how about putting the blame right where it belongs? It's never with the victim. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, MD Pran. Thank you so much, everyone, for the presentation. It was a wonderful session. Now we have a short survey on online dating. The link is given in this comment section. Please fill in the survey and the response are anonymous. We will wait for a minute and then we will continue. Please fill the survey.
I think while people are filling up the survey, we can continue and continue with the next session with the panelists.
Okay. So moving forward, our first speaker for the panel discussion is Ms. Jyoti Vadera. She is the Media and Communication Manager for the Center of Social Research and has been working on several projects that aim to combat the issues of online safety. Currently, she is working on a project to train and educate young school students and empower them with tools to help them with safety navigate an online world. Ms. Jyoti Vadera, thank you so much.
Hi, thanks. Thank you so much. And the presentations made by all college students, I think it was an eye-opener as to how seriously they are also taking the issues of online safety. We are here to talk about digital safety and young women in India during the COVID-19 pandemic. To jump right into it, I would say online abuse or violence existed much before the pandemic, as we all know. The online world is actually a reflection of the so-called offline or real world. There is a systemic discrimination embedded deep in our society, visible in family values, education materials in school, workplaces. This all we know. And I can relate to Riddhi's presentation that she made earlier, that it's patriarchy and it's the mindset in our culture that is actually the problem. What social media and digital communication technologies have done is that they have increased the ease with which abusers can identify and approach victims. And the range of online harassment, coercion, and sexual exploitation directed at women is diverse and harmful. And the ease with which this can translate into violence in the real world is a real issue. Forms of online violence can be threats of violence, direct and indirect threats of physical and sexual violence, violations of privacy, sharing of sexual and private messages without consent, discrimination, targeted content that is sexist, racist, homophobic, or related to an individual's identity, and online harassment. Communications where accounts working together to target an individual using abusive comments or images online over a short coordinated period of time is online harassment. Now the impact of these abuses, they push women out of the online sphere. This is one of our main concerns. They silence their voices and they expose them to the risk of actual physical harm. Over the past 7-8 years at Center for Social Research, we have engaged with thousands of young women and we have tried to gauge their situation. Here I can maybe take a few examples with which we will be very clearly be able to understand what I mean. When we visited an XYZ village in Haryana, we spoke with girls about their presence online or what they do online. We learned that these girls were barred from having any kind of online presence. Here in this forum, I can see we are all urban and we are from good colleges, from these backgrounds where we take this we take this for granted, our online presence. But families in villages or with these girls, they do not approve of these girls going online. On the other hand, the men and boys of these families owned smartphones, were on all social media sites. क्योंकि अच्छे घर की लड़कियां फेसबुक पे नहीं जाती, सेफ नहीं होता. If they are caught accessing the internet, there are serious consequences, and the family believes it will be a negative effect on I am narrating here, but we spoke with thousands of girls and boys across India and we conducted hundreds of workshops over many years. Now, what we realized that we need to, there has to be a systemic change. So in the next phase of our work, we recently, especially because of the pandemic, we are working on training school students on the issues of online safety. Some of us may be aware of the recent, and this has come up many times in this forum, issues involving teenagers called the boys' locker room. Or a more global issue which came a while back was the Blue Whale Challenge. So in our effort to combat these issues, we have taken the route of educating these students on positive online engagement, dangerous situation that they can encounter, and how not to let that overwhelm them. What needs to be addressed is their mental well-being, to empower and educate them with tools of online safety. We have trained thousands of school children on issues and with the support of CBSE and also Facebook. We look forward to training, and educating every student in India and enabling them to take care of themselves. What COVID-19 has been, it has been particularly unkind to women, fighting a shadow pandemic of abuse, and women have been the biggest sufferers of the lockdown as well as the post-lockdown period, be it at home or at the workplace. Maybe some of you read this news today. I was just reading that a woman tried to escape her abusive husband using the COVID-19 ambulance. This is real evidence that we see every day during the pandemic, that women are real sufferers of this. And evidence from the job sector is also grimmer for women than for women. This is what the COVID-19 pandemic has actually done to the situation of women and girls in India. At CSR, we believe that it is our collective responsibility to make online spaces safe for women, access to domestic helplines, mental health helplines. They should be easily available for them, and other issues of online safety need to be addressed. And we use these forums, like today. This is where we come up and we like to put forward our suggestions. And I want to begin talking about what suggestions we want to bring forward and we want you to be aware of. The first one is policy making and refinement needs to be done. Cohesive national and international laws that address online abuse. There have to be global standards for recognizing and responding to online abuse. We need mechanisms to hold actors accountable. Internet service providers need to establish internal policies for alignment with the law. Internet intermediaries need to pursue proactive structures to address abuse and illegal behaviors on their platforms. Networks need to be formed for advocacy for effective and coherent global standards. Exchange of data needs to happen between countries to combat online crimes. There need to be redressal mechanisms, effective civil and criminal legal options for response, and capacity building for law enforcement to deal with these issues. And what is at the heart of the work that we do at CSR is public education, teaching digital safety and citizenship tools in schools and colleges, making resources publicly available for parents, teachers, administrators, professionals, and the common man. I'm not saying there aren't redressal mechanisms available. Some of them are, there you can report abuse on social media websites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. They have reporting mechanisms. There are cyber cells which have been established especially to deal with victims of cybercrime. They come under the purview of crime investigation. My colleague is going to leave the link to the cyber cells. There are local police stations. You can file an FIR at your local police station. Remember, it is compulsory for the police station to register that FIR. So these were some of the redressal mechanisms that are available. There are also laws present, and my panelists would be better at doing that. There is also, I would also like to add that Ministry of Women and Child Development, they have a specific email account dedicated to complaints related to abusive behavior online. And the National Commission for Women, they have a helpline. I'm leaving that in the chat box here. There is a phone number and there is an email address that we can all access for any sort of complaints. So yeah. There are laws that someone in the presentation did mention, but not taking any more of your time. I think I will leave that up to my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now moving forward, our next speaker is Advocate Sumita Hazarika. She finished her degree from LSR College in Political Science and enrolled with the bar in 1995. She became an advocate on record in Supreme Court of India in 2001, a first-generation lawyer with her own independent practice.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear me. It was very enlightening for me to listen to all the students. They had a lot to share, and they have in fact educated me on many fronts. And I am really very, very happy to hear them all. And I was told that I have to basically speak on the legal processes that are available for online complaints. So people who face sexual harassment online. So what are the kind of fora they have, the legal processes that are available to them? One thing that from the presentations that were made by the students, one thing that I found very interesting was that about the online dating sites. And yes, we didn't realize that there is no age bar for joining these online dating sites. And as it appears, most of these online dating sites are not even registered. So they don't come under any kind of government control. So it is, of course, a very important thing that we as lawyers need to take up to make sure that these online dating sites are registered, for one. And number two, that they should be having a minimum age from where they can enroll themselves on these sites or use these sites. Some dating sites say that they are making a minimum age of 18 as the eligibility bar. But there are no checks. There are no checks. How do you ensure that somebody who's come on the site is 18 and above? So we have to make sure that these kind of checks are put in place. And a lot of the presentations also spoke about the boys' locker room case. It was interesting to see what people felt about that case. Yes, it is about, when we talk about cyber harassment, we also have to be very clear about, where do we draw the line? Because here is a case where there are these, teenagers who are discussing and who are actually not teenagers who are discussing and sharing pictures of women and having their their fun online, but where they have not really personally attacked anyone or has done any personal damage. But the fact that because they are boys and they could get away with it. So that is a sphere that we said, yes, it is a space that is mostly occupied by men. And that now women, it is a sphere that is open to all. So we have to know where we need to draw the line. As you are aware, I mean, most of you seem to be quite aware about the laws which are in place. The laws are still developing in India. We do not have many cases for cyber harassment as such. Some of them are there, but they are very few. And there are these provisions under the Information Technology Act, which says that sharing of any material online on an electronic forum or through a electronic medium, which is obscene, becomes a crime. And that is section 67A and section 67B. Section 67B is more specific in the sense that this is about exchanging any kind of images by relating to child or relating to child pornography. So there the provision is very strict. It says that even downloading such images would be a crime, would be an offense under section 67B. So this is a strict provision that they have tried to do. And we also have the IPC. Even under the IPCs, there are some provisions which say that, you know, that if there is any, if it makes that, you know, supposing somebody makes a sexually colored remark about a woman, then it becomes an offense under section 354A. Then you have section 354C, which says that, you know, disseminating or capturing images of women engaged in private act, where she is not in a public act, but she is in privacy, and if her images are shared, then it becomes an offense. Or online stalking, which is dealt with in section 354D. Then section 503 talks about criminal intimidation, issuing physical threats to a person. Section 506 deals with criminal intimidation by imputing unchastity to a woman. And 509 is any act which is intended to insult the modesty of a woman or to intrude into her privacy. Now these sections which are there in the Indian Penal Code, now if they come in conflict with the IT Act, that is the Information Technology Act, then the offense under the Information Technology Act is going to prevail over the IPC. Then you also have, we have some provisions under the Indecent Representation of Women's Prohibition Act. So there section 4 says that a publication of any printed material which makes an indecent representation of women becomes an offense. Then you also have the POCSO Act, which says that, you know, any sexual activity or with a child becomes an offense under the POCSO Act. So, and then we, what are the legal remedies that we have? What are the places where we can go to file our complaint? Now, of course, we have the complaint platforms in these social media platform itself, like my friend just before me just pointed out that Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, everybody has a place where you can go and file your complaint. But many times it is found that these complaints are not taken very seriously. And that is why we are facing the kind of problem we are facing today. Then we also have the cyber cells, which are set up by the government. And you can also make an online complaint to these cyber cells. Now, recently there was a complaint made by a student from Bangalore. And she had made an online complaint website. She did not get any response, so she ultimately had to approach the court. So she came to Delhi High Court and she said that she had put up some personal pictures on her Instagram account, and those pictures were stolen by some website company, which was a porn website, and they had put up her picture and used them there. And there were some 15,000 people who had already seen that those pictures. So she had to ultimately come to court to get those, to take action against those people. And it was in that case that the Delhi High Court had said that it is the Cyber Prevention, Awareness and Detection Unit of Delhi Police. This is the dedicated unit which deals with cyber crimes, because she had posted on www.cybercrime.gov.in and she did not get a response. So then the court said that this is the, and the Delhi government also said that this is the website on which she can place an online complaint. Then of course it is always good to file, you can always go and file a complaint at the local police station. The police has to take cognizance of your, it has to register a complaint if you go and make a complaint. Or as my friend pointed out, with the Ministry of Child and Women and Child Development and the National Commission for Women. And then what about the kind of evidence that you have? So at the moment you have, you're faced with a situation of harassment. So you should ensure that whatever material you have, you keep with you. You put it either on a CD or on a, or store it, so that you can use this evidence when you have filed your complaint, or you can file this evidence along with your complaint, so that it becomes easier for the prosecution to prosecute the case. And then of course there are, you know, we also have to use our discretion and also try and take some, you know, safety measures from our side as well, you know, to keep, to share as minimum information we can on them. I mean, you people know much more than we do. Then, you know, then anytime you see that anybody is facing any kind of cyberbullying, then you have to be proactive and ensure that this kind of bullying is stopped immediately, because you as friends, you may be discussing, there'll be people, your friends, who would be saying that they are facing such situations. Then it is always good to ensure that this bullying stops at the very beginning, instead of allowing it to go to a later stage where it becomes more difficult and more damage is caused to you. And that, you know, we have to be very cautious when we meet people online. We have to trust our instincts, and we shouldn't trust anybody who comes online, because we have never met them, so we have no idea about what they are. So it is always good to be more careful when we are on these sites. And so, I mean, we are getting more and more exposed, so it is for us to be very careful as to how we use the internet. And of course, a lot of non-governmental organizations, like my friend just said, that they are helping people to take up these complaints. Sometimes it is good to go to a NGO to help you with the complaint, because it is certainly a very tedious process, and the response from what we have seen is not very good. So you really need to take it up and persevere with those with your complaint for a long time before anything can be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Our last speaker is Advocate Tara Narula. She is an advocate with an independent practice, Narula and Associate, primarily in criminal litigation in New Delhi. Ms. Tara work centers around access to justice, child abuse, cyber crimes, and issues related to privacy and data management. To you, ma'am.
Thank you. I hope I'm last but not the least. So a lot of my points have been covered by everyone. So I'm going to change around my presentation a little bit. I'm going to share the slide, but please feel free to jump in at any point and ask me any questions, because really this is for you, and you know that I'm a lawyer, and we all tend to kind of just go down one track. And it would be really nice if those of you who have bandwidth can turn on your videos, then we can like see each other at least. Okay, so I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Everyone can hear me and everything, no? Okay. Sexual harassment online. That's what I'm going to speak about, but that's what all of you have been speaking about, and I've actually learned so much. about various perceptions and things like that, and various terms that I had no idea existed. Okay, so firstly, I wanted to talk about what is sexual harassment and how does it look when it's online. There are, in my opinion, very obvious forms of sexual harassment, some of which we've addressed. Doxing is one of them, which is taking photos of somebody without their consent, sharing them. Morphed photos, somebody talked about deep fakes. That's another one. Then there is entirely, making up a new persona, etc., threatening people, extending sexual threats, trolling, which often takes the form of sexualized bullying and discrimination. So if you express a view, somebody may come back at you with things that are gender and sex related, which can be extremely disturbing, and mostly one doesn't know what to do about it. Sexual requests, and of course, flashing, stalking, things like that. Two terms that I want to mention specifically, because there's a lot of literature around it actually, but I find that I didn't know them for very long. And I think that many people don't actually know them and think about them, but if you Google these, you'll figure it out. The first one is catfishing, which is to lure someone into a relationship by means of a fictional online persona. Means you fully make up an online persona, who you are, what you look like perhaps, what your profession is. It can be anything. And the motivation for this can be anything. It can go from abuse to fraud, and it can be wish fulfillment as well, which is just, I guess it's just like that. The second term I want to talk about is gaslighting, which is a very subtle form of harassment and abuse in my opinion, but it is very much harassment and abuse. It is a kind of psychological manipulation. It's a way of chipping away at somebody else's perception of things, such that by the end of it, they doubt themselves, and their self-esteem is itself lowered. So that's why the slide says it manipulates someone into doubting their own sanity. So it might be small things like saying that, oh, something that you remember never actually happened, challenging your perception of something. So if I feel that Sumita said something and she says, no, I never said that, and then maybe another person supports Sumita, and that would lead me into believing that I was perceiving things wrongly. It can be challenging my belief in something, and that can be done in subtle ways. For example, we have a lot of discussion around sex these days, or around relationships. You may have discussions around monogamy versus polygamy versus open relationships, whatever it may be, or sexuality. And if you have a certain belief about who you are and what you like and what your preferences are, that can be challenged by someone by psychologically manipulating you. And also your judgment, similarly. What gaslighting tries to do is to destabilize you as a person. And it ends up lowering your self-esteem so that you don't trust yourself anymore, and then you become an easy target. And one doesn't know how far it can go. It can be a sadistic measure, it can be something more than that. Interestingly, actually, this phrase gaslighting, it comes from a play and a movie. There was a play, like a movie in 1944 called Gaslight, which was basically, the story was, the husband in the play attempts to convince his wife and others that she is insane. He does this by telling her that she is mistaken or remembering things incorrectly or delusional when she points out changes. The main thing, the reason the play is called Gaslight is because over time, this abusive husband gradually dims the lights in the house, just a little, just a tinge every single day. And the wife just thinks she's, losing her mind. She can't see things properly. She thinks the lights are dim, but she can't also figure out what that one small change is. And he used to sort of make noises as he searches for things. And he keeps saying, no, everything is fine. And she repeatedly asks her husband to confirm her perception about the dimming lights, about the growing darkness and things, and the noises and voices. But he keeps insisting that the lights are the same, and instead manages to convince her that she is going insane. And that's where this phrase comes from, gaslighting, because it's a gas lamp, and he's reducing it just a little bit every day. Okay. So what do you do when you are faced with a form of sexual harassment? I think the first point should be to recognize it, because why I brought up catfishing and gaslighting is that it is almost impossible to recognize it until you are very far into it, or until somebody else points it out to you. And that's why I think we need to talk more about these subtle forms of harassment or subtle ways of putting people down, rather than just talking about the very overt forms of harassment. So what do you do once you recognize that you are being harassed or stalked or etc.? I think firstly, everybody must already be doing this, and I must be behind the times, but tightening your cybersecurity, which means figuring out your passwords, have different passwords, etc. All of those things, which I'm not going to get into because I'm not an expert on that, but I'm sure that all of you have actually done quite a lot of work on that. If you are harassed, one of the things that you should do is that you should take screenshots. You should take screenshots of the messages, print them, etc. Especially if they're on Facebook, on someone else's profile about you. You need to have a record of it by way of a screenshot. If it is something that's sent personally to you or on your Facebook or on your Twitter, etc., don't delete the content. Because if you need to take action in the future, you need to save it. This is a mistake that I have made myself, where I've received, messages or even, sorry to use the phrase, but dick pics and so on. And I've just gotten rid of them rather than taking any action, because you don't want that content on your phone. But just remember, if you are being harassed in a systematic way, you need to save that content. You need to save it the way it is on your phone. It doesn't stop you from blocking the sender if it's on WhatsApp, etc. Twitter, Facebook, all social media platforms have a period of 24 to 48 hours in which they have to act on takedown requests. How do you do a takedown request? You simply click on the post and you say report abuse or report post, whatever the option might be, and you report it in the correct category. They have a period of only 48 hours to take action on it. They can say it's not abusive, but if it is at all abusive or explicit or anything like that, they have to take it down. So reporting in that way is the absolute first step to take. Also, they all have legal addresses, which are all available on their, not like facebook.com, but on their websites otherwise. So you guys can look up their legal addresses. It's usually like support@facebook.in or legal@facebook.in, that sort of thing. And same with WhatsApp. And you can shoot off an email saying that this is a photo of me, it's been morphed, and so on and so forth, and you need to take it down. And they have to act on it ASAP. You, of course, can use the block sender, and then you can seek legal help, which is easier said than done most often, I know. I'm not going to go through this because Sumita went through it really well. I'm only going to tell you that I don't know if any of you are under 18, but this is a huge problem, I think, that people face, which is if they enter into a relationship with someone under 18 and they themselves are over 18, they can be liable for all kinds of acts under the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act, which is otherwise known as POCSO. So I think this, until the law changes on us, until we have something called a Romeo and Juliet exception, which allows for young people who are within 2 years age, 3 years age of each other to have relationships. Until that happens, I think this is something that everyone should be mindful and careful of, which is for the boys in the group, you need to verify the ages of the women that you might talk to online, on Tinder or otherwise, and same goes for the women. Some more steps to take if you need to make a complaint is to document the abuse, take screenshots, and preserve the original device. Don't lose your phone. Don't drop it in water. Don't throw it in out of a car, etc. You do need to have a friend to act as your support system, and also prepare for an uphill road ahead if you're reporting the case. But I would urge everyone to actually report when it happens, even if then you don't do much, you don't follow up much, just make the report. Because the second time somebody does this thing, there'll be a record of it. So even if you're not going the whole way, or you're going to let it languish in the police station, that's fine. Just make the complaint anyway. I think all of this has already been discussed, but there are many options and avenues. You can lodge an FIR in a police station. You can lodge an FIR online. You can file a complaint at cybercrime.gov.in. You can file it at the Ministry of Women and Child Development. You can just shoot an email. And you can also shoot an email to the complaint cell of the National Commission for Women. I take no responsibility for how well they treat your complaint or how fast they act or anything like that. But like I said, part of making a complaint, part of doing something is creating a record. Because somebody who has harassed one person is likely to harass another person if they know that that's what they're doing, if it's intentional. If you go to a police station, this is very important, guys. If you go to a police station, take a friend. Whatever complaint you write down, take 2 copies. And you have to carry all your evidence with you. Even if you don't want to do that, if you just want to take a complaint letter, that's also fine, because you'll give the evidences later. Take a complaint, 2 copies, submit your complaint, and on 1 copy, get a receiving. A shockingly large number of people don't get a receiving for a complaint, and then it's like it never happened. So you have to get a complaint with something called a daily diary number. So you should all remember this in all avenues of life, because sometime or another, somebody is going to lose something or something's going to happen, and FIR might need to be lodged, and a daily diary number is really important. It's a record of your complaint. You have to also then insist that an FIR actually be registered, insist that adequate provisions are invoked in the FIR, which Sumita talked about and Jyoti also talked about a bit. You have a right to get a copy of your FIR. So do ask for it, and ask for it in writing. Anything that they put you off, that they don't give you, you ask for it in writing. It's that much harder to put off, and you have remedies in case they put it off in writing. This is the Delhi Police website. It is what I go to all the time for all kinds of information. And you can do the same. You can lodge an online FIR on the Delhi Police website. You can also find the email addresses of all the police stations, like the SHOs, etc. You can find their phone numbers, all of which have WhatsApp, are WhatsApp enabled. And worst comes to worst, just send a long WhatsApp message or an email, etc. And that still counts as a complaint that has been made on a particular date. One thing with complaints, especially for cases like this, is that everybody is just waiting to see what mistakes you make. So, for example, if you decide to wait a week, that is something that's going to count against you. So it is a lot of pressure, but you have to make up your mind kind of fast and then create this first record. You can fix things as you go along, but create a first detailed record of what happened and what you're complaining about. Because delay counts against you. Many things count against victims, unfortunately, in such scenarios. You're all in universities, I think, and you're all going to go off into workspaces. So you should know about this particular act. It's called the Protection of Women from Sexual Harassment. And it provides for various civil remedies. So it means you don't go to police stations and you don't get involved in a criminal case. But it provides these remedies within the workspace if you experience harassment, and that includes online harassment. Especially since a lot of our workspaces right now are online workspaces, your only interaction with colleagues, etc., might be through Zoom and so on. So that being the case, you should know about this legislation. You have to just write a written complaint to, it's called the Internal Complaints Committee, but if you can't identify who the Internal Complaints Committee is, you can write it to anybody, like the HR, the ethics officer. It's their job to route it and then to get back to you. And they will usually do things that you need fast. For example, they will tell the assailant or the aggressor not to email you or not to get in touch with you, things like that. This might be a little controversial, and I have to confess that I haven't fully thought it out. But, and I would love your comments on this. I think that of course, we've talked a lot about victim blaming, so I'm not going to go back to victim blaming. But I think that now, in the cases that I'm seeing a lot, I find that people don't know how to modulate their online behaviors. whether intentionally or unintentionally, men and women end up indulging in behaviors and saying things online that they would not necessarily do in real life. And I think we must all check ourselves, because it is so easy to gaslight someone or to catfish or to bully, do cyberbullying in a virtual space without really engaging with the fact that you are harming another person, since we all live in this kind of virtual world. And I think that the onus is on all of us to learn acceptable online behaviors, implement them in communicating with our friends, family, and strangers, and to be cognizant of the meaning and importance of words. So, for example, in non-COVID times, perhaps if you didn't reply to somebody's text message, in certain circumstances, like that would be fine. But online, if that is your only mode of communication, you're shutting somebody out, and you should be cognizant of that. So abuse and behaviors that don't stand in real life, for example, you would not ignore a person if they were standing in front of you, also don't stand in online spaces very often. It's not a perfect transition between the two things, but I think that we have to modulate our own behaviors, and we have to also then put the blame for harassment and the onus for harassment on the perpetrators and not the victims. So it's not my responsibility to ensure that I don't get hacked. It's someone else's responsibility to not hack, etc. And that's about it for my presentation. And I would love to hear your thoughts and comments.
Thank you, Tara. There are lots of chat messages requesting if you could share a copy of your PPT. So if it's okay with you.
Sure. Of course.
With the participants.
I'll do that. I'll email it to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we are open for a brief question answer session. We will take your questions in comment box. Please post your queries.
I think we are a little running out of time, so maybe we'll just take the first two questions if there are any questions.
We are waiting for your questions. Hello.
Ma'am, can I speak something? Can I say something apart from questions?
Yes, please.
Yes. First of all, thank you so much, everyone, for giving us the opportunity to present our views. I think that we have an access to such a dynamic platform, which has opened up every arena of our life. But nowadays, these negative sides are open up very easily. We all are looking at the negative impact of these sites. The problem lies here is that today we need a collective effort. We need collective consciousness. We need awareness, but we need support as well. I want to say that this innovative webinar will be fruitful only when each one of us pledge to check our behavior online, to check how we are behaving online. Either we are conscious while we are engaging in these networks or not. When we will do it, when we will take this responsibility over our shoulders, we become collective. We need a collective effort. We throw a collective effort in the society, then only change will come.
Okay, thank you.
Add this.
There's one question that has come. If the victim blaming is happening from the home itself, then how to deal with it? And a question from Damayanti: can someone else act on behalf of someone who is doxxed? So I'll just leave it to any of the panelists, whoever wants to answer whichever question. That is, one is if victim blaming is happening from family, means if your family members are telling you not to, and can someone else act on behalf of someone else who is doxxed?
Okay, so I can start. Yes, I think so. It depends what the content is. Okay, so there are different complaints for different things. If someone is sharing your private information, including your images and stuff, that might come into one of these acts that we've discussed, like the Indian Penal Code or the Information Technology Act, or the Indecent Representation of Women Act. Now, Information Technology Act, especially, guys, just like you can note it down, it's called Section 66 and it's Section 67. 2 sections only that you have to read with many parts, I'll confess. You'll see that many of them, like, they will tell you what the punishments are and what the things are. They're not tough to understand. That's why I'm telling you all to read it. The punishment, if it's more than 3 years, it's something called a cognizable offense, which means any person off the street can go make a complaint to a police station and they have to register an FIR on it. You just have to give information. Rest is up to the police. The other thing is, of course, anybody can report a post that you see on social media. You can report the post. You don't have to be the target of that post, mostly. Especially on Twitter, that's the case. So to that extent, you can take those steps, and you can also try the other remedies, like you can write emails to NCW, etc. I'm not sure how much action they would take on it, but they should. Like, I've done it in the past for my clients, for example, where I've been the person who's lodged an NCW complaint on behalf of my client. So they accept that. So you can act as a representative for somebody and file that complaint. But of course, I would like to add that, you know, any approach by anybody should be victim-centric. That's really important. Because there are all kinds of consequences that emerge from subjecting somebody to a legal proceeding as a victim or an accused. Obviously, as a lawyer, I would always say, like, a victim should report a crime or anything, etc. But that at the same time, I just don't think that it is the kind of thing that you can push down somebody's throat, and that it's more important to support the person who's being doxxed, etc., or being targeted online. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to add to what Tara's just said, that of course an outsider can file the complaint also because of the fact that even if a victim does not complain about the act, or if she consents, but the mere fact that it was transmitted into an electronic media itself creates the offense. So certainly a complaint can be filed by anybody, even an outsider. The moment it comes on the public platform, anybody can file it. And about the home, that if your parents don't support you, then you are, these are things that you have to take a decision on your own, and you have to take support of your friends or organizations who are willing to help you. And we have to act against these kind of situations because they are only going to increase. So unless we keep them in check, it will be very difficult for us to operate. So it is very important for us to keep these things under check at the very beginning.
Okay, thank you both so much. I think we'll close with just one last question, and there's one question which I think Tara can take. Is there any change in punishment when the accused is below 18?
Yes, the provisions of the Juvenile Justice Act apply in that case. So it's a completely different procedure, and not a completely different procedure. The victim would still make a complaint as they are making. The police or whatever body takes cognizance of it would have to act in accordance with that. So it will be a lesser punishment. There won't be imprisonment, things like that. So it's a lesser punishment if the accused is below 18. Simply put.
Thank you. All right, Shagun, I think we can't take any more questions. So.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions. Now, I would like to request Ms. Damayanti to say a few words. Ms. Damayanti is a senior advisor of FES. Ma'am?
Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Gayatri. I'm sorry I have not been able to put on my video, but I'm having internet issues. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I would just like to say that I really feel that these kind of webinars are very useful, and I was especially impressed by the presentations of the students who put in so much effort in taking surveys and bringing out very, very pertinent points, which frankly I was not even aware of, and equally very well responded by the resource persons. And I think these kind of engagements are very, very important in these times. And I hope we are able to facilitate more of such discussions and see some positive change uh, in terms of changing mindsets and the things which were brought out so beautifully by the students themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now I would like to request everyone to please turn on your camera. So please turn on your video so we can take a picture. All the participants, all the panelists.
Who is taking the photo?
I'm taking the photo.
All right.
Just
a minute. I think we're done. Thank you so much.
It's done?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of you and to all the panelists and the students. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Bye.
The participants will get the certificates at the end of this week, most probably.
So, and thank you everyone for discussing and participating in this webinar. Thank you. Thanks, Shagun.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am.